Welcome everyone. My name is Reining and I'll be your facilitator for today on this webinar that addresses greenwashing and how to not fall in that trap. So who are we? We are the Regenerative Collaboratives of South Africa. We're a non-profit organization focused on transforming our built environment into a regenerative one. We promote strategies and approaches that bring regenerative design and construction to life. We work collectively to inspire, educate, create awareness, and contextualize regenerative built environment approaches to the South African context. And we really try to make an effort to showcase local projects, local people, and local companies that are aligned with our goal, which is creating a regenerative future. So with that introduction, you can find all our previous webinars on our YouTube channel. And if you're there, just also hit the subscribe button. That would really help us as well to get sponsorships for these webinars. Also, just follow us if you're not following us yet on Eventbrite, the registration platform, on LinkedIn or YouTube. You can find us. I think we're also on Instagram, but yeah, LinkedIn and YouTube are the most active ones. So please follow us there. And this, I was looking for this. Since last month, we've got some additional subscribers. So we're going to keep track of that in these webinars. Also, if you're not busy in normal life and you have an hour to spare during the week, we can really use your help on the admin or the social media side. So yeah, raise your hand and contact us if you want to help us. Yeah, and with that was all the housekeeping and the introductions. We're going to get into the topic of the day, which is greenwashing exposed. And today's sponsor, we've got SIAT, South African Institute of Drafting, and they waived our CPD validation costs. So we're really grateful for them. It saves us time and energy to raise sponsorship. So thanks to SIAT. And we've got 3 speakers today. And the first speaker unfortunately couldn't make it due to a personal emergency. So I'm going to present on her behalf. We're just going to share her details as well, because if you want to know more about green tech, you can call Lisette. And then, so I'm going to do Lisette's presentation, and then after that, Michelle will take over from me. And Michelle is a sustainability expert with a career rooted in sustainable architecture and green building design. She began her professional journey in the US with firms like HOK and William McDonough & Partners, later becoming a lead accredited professional. And then since moving to South Africa in 2006, she has played a key role in shaping the local green building landscape as a sustainability consultant, Green Star AP faculty member and independent assessor, really contributing to the development and the application of the various Green Star rating tools in South Africa. In addition to her work on green building certifications, Michelle co-founded Eco Standards, which she will talk about as well, a South African eco-labeling program providing third-party verification of environmentally responsible products. And also very exciting, her focus on green education tailored to the African context through GreenEd, which we co-founded together, where we wanted to help professionals and students gain knowledge needed to design and build for a more sustainable future. And then after Michelle, we've got a third speaker, which is Thando. She is a sustainability professional with expertise in ESG reporting, environmental management, and sustainable business practice. As the sustainability coordinator at Belcotex Floor Coverings, Thando leads the company's ESG reporting in alignment with global frameworks such as GRI and ESRS, too many abbreviations in that field, managing eco-labels, including Global Green Pact, and conducts in-house life cycle assessments as well. She's got a strong focus on sustainability strategy, circular economy, and credible environmental claims, which is what this webinar is about. Thando brings valuable experience in addressing greenwashing and promoting see through EPDs and eco-labels. She holds a BSc in Environmental Science and an honors degree in Ecological Sciences from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And she will share today insights how EPDs and eco-labels can combat greenwashing, foster transparency, and drive meaningful sustainability in the manufacturing. So I think we've got a nice set with three very different perspectives. So I'm just going to kick it off with an introduction into greenwashing. So what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is when companies use advertising and messaging to appear more environmentally friendly than they truly are. It often involves misleading claims or superficial efforts to distract from harmful environmental practices. In this world, in this time where greenwashing is probably more common than ever, companies using very clever language, branding, and buzzwords to appear more environmentally friendly than they actually are, and so many labels and claims, it's becoming really hard for consumers to tell what's genuinely sustainable. And I'm sure we're all dealing with that. So eco-friendly messaging does not always reflect the real environmental impact of the companies that use these things. So we have something that's called the 7 sins of greenwashing, and I'll really quickly go through that because we have and a couple of other greenwashing slides that sort of tell the same story. But let's have a quick look. So the sins of hidden trade-off, that's like highlighting one green aspect while ignoring more harmful impacts like emissions. The sin of no proof, like no justification or credible evidence that makes your claim justifiable. The sin of vagueness, like using very unclear, vague, broad, all natural kind of thing, which can be very misleading. The sin of irrelevance, citing claims that may be true but are meaningless. For example, which is a good example, like CFC-free. CFC is already banned by legislation, so that should not really be a claim. That should be a no-brainer. And then the sin of the lesser of two evils, making a product seem eco-friendly within a harmful category like organic cigarettes. The sin of fibbing, simply making false environmental claims. And the last one is the sin of false labels, which is using logos to imply third-party certifications that actually don't exist. So just to test your knowledge of this, hands up or maybe thumbs up if you can spot a label that you think is a real label. You guys know. Raise the hand, one hand. Okay. Basically, all of these are fake labels with broad claims. None of these are real third-party certified labels. Another form of greenwashing is through images, and I must say I sometimes use these images as well, but I'm all about green, so anyway, so don't know if that's greenwashing or not, but you know what I mean, like having a product associated with green images or green planets to make it look greener than it is. Greenwashing through colors, I think the picture says it all. Just because the packaging is green, it doesn't necessarily mean the product is green, whereas these brands seem to imply that. So we've got a couple of slides on the different shades of green, and this is becoming more and more sophisticated, and the best marketing and communication minds are being put to use by companies. So these are some of the green tactics, the greenwashing tactics to look out for. Green crowding is when companies intentionally blend into an industry crowd, and I think this is very relevant for us, which is basically typically when companies join a collective sustainability initiative or aligning themselves with vague industry norms. So, for example, and I'm going to try not to mention any actual brands, but we can all make up our minds who does this and who doesn't do this. But several major South African retail brands, retail chains, are members of an industry-wide voluntary group, such as the South African Plastics Pact. So by signing up to this initiative and showing like we're signed up to this initiative, shows some kind of or alignment with this, that they would do very well under the plastics. But having a membership of a particular organization doesn't mean that you're actually meeting their requirements. So that's green crowding. Green lighting is really where companies highlight a minor green initiative to distract from the larger environmental harmful practices. So, for example, a fossil fuel company that starts highlighting how well they're doing in their renewable energy partnerships or their commitments to net zero, whereas their really bread and butter is fossil fuels. So highlighting something that they're doing really well, but actually it's not their main core business. Green shifting, where the company might shift the responsibility to a consumer to be more sustainable and reduce their own responsibility. So, for example, bottle companies or beverages companies that encourage consumers to recycle or reuse or reduce littering, whereas they should be looking at like, how can I make my product greener instead of telling my consumers to do recycling, for example. Green rinsing is a sneaky tactic where companies keep shifting the goalpost just before the whistle blows, making bold claims, but actually never quite delivering because the target quietly moves. And an example of that is our national power utility, which is probably the most carbon intensive company in South Africa, definitely, making claims to become net zero by 2050, and having all kinds of ambitious plans around just energy transition, but then, you know, changing the scopes or delaying timelines to actually get to these kind of goals. Green labeling, I guess this is what we're all very familiar with. It's about service level marketing tricks that suggest sustainability without any real substance. Think about eco, the word eco or the word natural or the word planet friendly slapped on a product without any proof. And again, an example of this is where, you know, the retailers have all these plastic bags, which are now labeled as biodegradable, eco-plastic, or environmental friendly, whereas plastic bags are just not eco-friendly. And then color washing, that's like the chameleon of marketing deception. It's a umbrella brand for greenwashing, pink washing, blue washing, rainbow washing, and I'm not going to go over this into too much detail, but you can think like of examples that relate to this. And the last one is sports washing, where companies, you know, use the emotional power and popularity of sport to distract from controversies, improve public image, and deflect criticism of unethical practices. And you can, again, like a fossil fuel company who is sponsoring a soccer team or an arts exhibition or a music event, just to, you know, deflect from the main harmful thing of the company. So some more examples, H&M, and this is not only to the built environment, but like in the clothing and the fashion industry, there's all kinds of greenwashing going on. H&M had this conscious choice collection, and when they were looking into it, it actually didn't mean anything. Other brands, like most major corporates, are quite guilty of greenwashing. So basically what it comes down to is like 4 out of 5 companies don't really have an idea of how to achieve their climate goals. And a climate goal without a plan is a is actually a green fairy tale. The impact of greenwashing has actually quite disastrous effects on the environment. It delays real action from companies, where the companies are faking their environmental credentials, as it creates an illusion of progress. And it also misleads customers and investors. Like, greenwashing really erodes any trust people want to have in brands. So it actually does a lot more damage than good. So what is the solution? Look for products with trusted eco-labels, eco-label certification, and real metrics to score product performance. But with that comes now, which label do you choose? There's so many eco-labels out there. Eco-labels make life easier to choose products within trusted green credentials, but what does each label mean, and which are the most meaningful and useful to your particular industry? And that's quite a minefield. There's eco-labels that have a very specific product, like floor score obviously for flooring, or FSC for timber, and fair trade for ethical businesses. So that's for product specific products. You also have eco-labels that touch on a very specific topic, like, for example, your fridge labeling on energy, or your Energy Star on your appliances, that indicate or only focus on one particular aspect, which is not, there's nothing wrong with that. They're very clear, and they're very, very good labels as well. And then there are product specific or industry specific eco labels and rating tools, like, for example, obviously within the green building field or in the building industry, we're looking at Green Star, LEED, EDGE certification. If we're looking at, for example, the forestry, you're looking at PEFC or FSC. So each industry has their own labels, and I mean, you can imagine that it becomes quite a minefield. So in the industry that we are in, eco-labeling really supports the sustainable procurement. And sustainable procurement means considering the full life cycle of a product, not just the price. And this includes design, materials, manufacturing, use, maintenance, and disposal, along with social, environmental, and economic impacts across the supply chain. And eco-labels support sustainable procurement by providing a trusted information on products' impact from creation to end of life, helping buyers to make more responsible choices based on the overall life cycle value and not just the upfront cost associated with it. And I'm just here promoting on Lisette's behalf, the global green tech, which is a local third-party certification body that evaluates products for their impact on human health, ethical label, and the environment. It's been running since 2010, and it's a global recognized eco-labeling program. And they currently have over 16,000 products certified in South Africa. So that's really great. And I'm going to leave it at that, because I know Michelle is going to pick up here and talk more about sort of the backbone of these eco labels.
That was probably one of the nicest introductions I've ever had. It's my pleasure. So thanks for that good overview, Marloes. So greenwashing has been around for quite some time. I've been at this for over 20 years, and greenwashing, I actually want to just add on to what you've said before, is way back when there was a lot of nefariousness, but I think now what's almost more problematic is a lot of companies think they're doing the right green marketing and it's coming across really disingenuous, or they're not hitting the right tone. So I think a lot of times what's kind of vaguely greenwash is inadvertently. So I had this, this happens a lot. If you're asking, so how do I know your company's environmentally friendly? And then often what you're sent is, well, here's our brochure. It's the wording, the typeface, and the pictures of nature in the brochure. So clearly we're so green, and it's like 6 pages long, and it doesn't actually tell you anything. So I'm a little bit of a cynic after all these years, but I want the technical stuff. But today, I'm going to talk about where green labels come into this. And one of my favorite topics in general is green materials. So we have a whole nother webinar on that, but I'm going to keep it specific to eco labels. Where some of these companies get it maybe a little bit wrong is they'll take one aspect that they think is green and then they'll focus their marketing on that, but then they miss kind of the bigger picture. So if you take a minute and just think about this, you know, save trees, use metal. It's like, okay, how, you know, I think you see it, but so that's out there. And as a specifier, we don't have a lot of time to really sit and process this stuff. So we get it. And so that's kind of where hopefully we'll give maybe a little bit of a framework to where you can start to evaluate these things, and eco labels play a big part in that. I'm going to narrow it down, keep it to 10 big ideas about eco labels, and I'm going to start with something familiar. We all know this label. You probably use it when you go grocery shopping. And what does it do for us? It captures multi-attributes about a product, and then that info is benchmarked. So it could even be two different types of products, but you can measure it across all products so that we can take two different types of foods and work out how many kilojoules or quantity of sugar in two different things. Now, why can we use this food label without questioning it? And we give it merit, and we know that it presents information we're looking for, is because there are rules and standards that have gone into creating it, as well as it's obligatory on food products these days. But we know we can trust it because we know it has that track record, and that it's from trusted third parties, like it's been evaluated. You can't just fake it. So then when we come to green labels, as Marlies is mentioning, there's quite a lot out there. Just even 49 are relevant to South Africa's context. And these are cut across quite a lot of industries: tourism, farming, hospitality, cleaning, etc. But if we narrowed it just to the built environment, there's still 22 that are relevant. So it's still quite a lot to wade through. So I call this a green fog because we're bombarded by a lot of labels, and it makes the decision process difficult. So how to navigate this and how to bring some clarity to that. So I'm often asked, well, what about standards? We should make people do this, or it should be legislated. Excuse me, just like green buildings, that doesn't fly very well. So what do we have in South Africa? We've got South African Bureau of Standards, but their intent is mainly towards minimum compliance, in particular safety and quality, and they're not necessarily there to, you know, prescribe best practices. I don't want to disparage them, but if there are best practices, it's not necessarily there as an aspirational way where you get that and you get some recognition for it. Then ISO 14001, you may have heard of as in a green sense. That essentially is an operations framework for a company, and they self-define their goals environmentally, and then they go after and achieve the goals, but it's very much an operational framework. And then we're asked about, what about Green Star and the GBCSA? So do they rate products? And that's a big no. So if you take one thing away from today, it's they do not rate products. And it's highly likely they never will. That's not their game. I've got a bit more on them in a bit, but they are relevant when it comes to eco-labeling certification programs. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's start with what is not an eco-label. So there's environmental labels as a bigger scheme, but eco-labels as a subset are specific because they address criteria of comprehensiveness, independence, and reliability. And there's standards for this. So what it also is not is a vague logo or brand mark. I think Marlies covered that quite a bit in the last talk. And you see a lot of these, and a lot of times companies have put these up to, before there was a lot of good eco labels, they just wanted people to know. So I think it was with good intentions, but that on its own does not mean much. So if you focus on which labels do have substance, then you can ignore many of these other attempts, which ultimately fall in that, you know, greenwash category. So what is an eco label? So there's standards for these standards from ISO, and it has a few aspects. So it needs to be, first of all, a voluntary participation. The eco labels do not aim to replace the existing legislation. but they provide recognition and a competitive advantage to products that achieve higher standards of environmental protection than the minimums that are usually legislated by like standards like SABs. Then it needs to communicate that the product has reached distinction in the environmental performance in comparison to average products in the same category. So these are, again, this is just like the framework from ISO that says what you need to do if you want to be an eco label. Then it needs to show that it's based on sound scientific evidence. In particular, they're aimed at simplifying the transmission of technical information about environmental performance to the broad public. Again, that's a communication thing. It's not just throwing data to the public. It's meant to communicate in a little bit more layperson understand level. That said, they are based on and must respect stringent and measurable scientific type data, so measurable. Then it needs to be third-party, independently verified, at least one of the categories, which I'll get to just now. And then finally, the ideal eco-label would look at a life cycle consideration. So just quickly on life cycle, just to make sure we're on the same page, this is from cradle to gate is how a lot of them look at. So from extracting the raw materials all the way through to manufacturing it, you send it to the site, you use it, afterwards it's a waste. This is a cradle to grave model. But so just starting with that. Another way of looking at this, also called life cycle analysis, LCA. If you add up the energy and intensiveness of these processes, extraction, transport, processing, transport again, then you're manufacturing, then you're assembling, and then you're transporting it. And that's just getting it to site. And then you've got the user and then afterwards. So we often call this embodied energy if you were to tally it up with like, maths. Where this is challenging is that LCA is complex and fairly endless. And there are many tools out there trying to get to a magic calculator for LCA. I hate to sound like a cynic, but they're not very user-friendly because they really have to be based on a lot of data, sort of data that comes from the area that you're in. So you can't use an LCA tool from the United States or Australia. You can kind of get maybe a big picture thing, but you're not working with the same data for able to be applied here. This is just an example of a whiteboard marker, like a Koki on the left. If you were to take it apart into its pieces, plastic, ink, aluminum barrel, and then you can quite quickly see how all the parts and pieces that go into just producing it can get quite complicated for a simple object. So these standards break down into 3 types, and I do think I may get a little bit dry here, but it's important because one is the one you want to be concerned about the most. So I'm going to start with number 2, because this is the self-declared claim. So a manufacturer says I'm green, and it falls into this type 2. This is not very useful. I'm surprised ISO even needs to define this, but it's there. Type 3 is more useful, and this would encompass environmental product declarations, EPDs. These consist as qualified product information based on life cycle impacts. The environmental parameters are fixed. There's a certain format to report in, and it's very standardized. So if we think back to the food and nutrition labels, that's a similar example. The data is presented in a set format, but it does not necessarily provide a subjective interpretation or opinion, and it does require the viewer to have background knowledge to draw conclusions. So it's like a lot of data presented to you in a format, but if you don't know what to do with it, it doesn't really help you so much. But it is good that manufacturers are doing these, not to disparage them, but to the layperson, it's not as helpful. So that's considered type 3. And that's more of a disclosure tool than a green tool. So then what we're looking at for eco labels falls into what's called a type 1 category. And these are independent. They take into multi-attributes, which I'll show just now, such things like energy and water consumption, emissions, disposal. And this group is the most useful from the point of view of a procurement practitioner or like a specifying professional, because it gives a bigger snapshot of the total environmental impact. And this is where we were alluding to earlier, there are a lot of labels out there. And then there's these single issue labels, which was touched on earlier, how they're still very useful, but they are looking at a more narrow criteria. This one looking at Energy Star Energy, Water Sense Water, and forestry management practices. But again, even in these narrow labels, they're very useful when it comes to certification tools like Green Star and LEED, because, you know, it's just someone else has done the work about giving it a rubber stamp of approval, and then you can go on from there. So even the single labels are worth pursuing. Just an example, carpet has labels for VOCs, which is useful, but where that falls short, as an example, is VOCs would be like the off-gassing, but like what fiber is it made from and what's the impacts of the fiber? Is it wool? Is it nylon? Is it, you know, polyester? And then does it have recycled content, or is it virgin material? And then what are its options at the end of its useful life? And none of those are captured in these single issue labels. And then how much energy is used to create it is another aspect. If it comes from a solar powered factory, how can this be documented and appreciated if it only reflects the one aspect of emissions? So our next speaker is going to talk about their amazing green journey as a company with a solar powered factory. I'll leave that to her. So then in these multi attribute labels, what are the areas, what are the topics? So in general, it would include things like energy, toxicity, resources, water consumption, social and ethical, and end-of-life options. And these are here because these are defined by the Green Building Council as what they think makes a good eco-label. And I'll tell you more about that now. They also include local context, which, as we know, is very important to us in South Africa, more so than a lot of places. So that's been added to their evaluation. So of those criteria, just a quick example is when you think of end of life of a product. So what happens to old office chairs in this picture as an example? So let's say the fabric is like 100% recycled content nylon. Yay, it's got this green footprint, but then at the end of its life, it sits in a room like this, or it ends up in a landfill, and that is what it is. So it kicks the can down the path a bit, which again is a step in the right direction, but it's not, you know, really addressing the end of life issues. So as an example of a company that has done something to this effect, this was done quite a few years ago now, so quite a few companies do this now, but this was a chair that looked at, you know, what does it mean to be a chair? And they designed it that it can be disassembled in 5 minutes with just some common hand tools. So they actually want the chair back, and then they can take it apart, and then they can recycle 99% of it back into its own material, plastic back into plastic, metal back into metal. I think if I remember correctly, the only thing that wasn't recyclable was the hydraulic canister or something to that effect. But it's a design issue. So it's a product design issue. And going back to the drawing board of like, well, let's put out in the world what we actually want to, you know, deal with later in life, as opposed to making it someone else's problem. So number 6, we've got some labels here. Marlies touched on the green tag, which I'll touch on now as well. The other one would be eco standard. And this is exciting. I was involved in some of this establishment of this, and I'm on the technical committee. But this is a nonprofit, and it's a third-party verified eco-label that was launched and operational since 2013. It focuses at the moment on building products in the construction industry because that's where the need was first. It's a type 1 label, and it was most importantly developed in South Africa for our market. And part of our criteria was looking at we looked at, first of all, the best practices globally, and we wanted to be on par with that, and we are. And then we wanted to make it accessible and address the barriers of entry in the South African market, particularly like costs. And you'll hear with our next speaker some of what it means to go down this path of product assessment. It's not for the faint of heart, but trying to make that as easy as possible and straightforward and cost effective so that we can move the needle in the market. This is also recognized by the Green Building Council. And then we'll hear lots about green tag coming up with our next speaker. But similarly, they have been here and active for a long time. And then they also have a global footprint, having started out in Australia. And yeah, we'll get a lot more on that coming up from Thando. I did a bit of an analysis once of both of these labels plus cradle to cradle, which is another one. And I just wanted to point out this criteria on the top is what the Green Building Council sets out as what makes a good certification scheme and how they all rank up. So you can see they're all pretty good. And then down below, the purple is some additional criteria that's specific to the label. So the eco standard one has a lot of local focus. Something like cradle to cradle has a lot on toxicity and chemicals. So there's a little bit of variations, but they are in tools like Green Star and LEED are seen as, acceptable. So just another quick beat on Green Building Council. So just to make it clear, they do not test, review, or certify products or materials, only building projects. But they do rely on these third-party certification bodies for part of their tools. And then they also run a scheme that will vet these labels. So that's the extent of what they'll do for materials. And with the new version coming out, it'll be very similar to this. And then that's vetting the labels. They're given a level of A, B, and C, depending on how many criteria they meet. So you can see the two at the top meet all three levels. And yeah, so that's very exciting. Moving on, almost done. The next big idea, which is really, really important, is transparency. And hopefully this isn't new to most of you, but it brings the opportunity to encourage positive change and understanding what a product is made of and its part and parcel. The architects do this anyway. They need to know, be familiar with what the materials are as part of their craft. And in the past, our criteria has been focused on things like durability and workability and cost and performance. But today, in our post-industrial economy, materials are often made of chemicals synthesized in factories, and they're complex. And it makes understanding it very difficult and complex. And these chemicals are over and over again proven to be very hazardous to human health. So how to make informed decisions here? You need to have some understanding of the manufacturing and sourcing, and it gets quite complicated. I like this example that was used by the International Living Futures Institute that I'm going to borrow and paraphrase because it just shows it very nicely. On the left, if you take like a Tinky, you call them here, cake and cream, and you were look at it at the macro level of 10,000 parts per million, that doesn't sound so bad. Cake, I know, cream, I know, yeah, okay, that's good. But if you zoom in to 1,000 parts per million, now all of a sudden you can see the ingredients. It's like flour, sugar, corn syrup, niacin, high fructose corn syrup. Okay, I've heard of most of those things. I don't like the high fructose part, but you still kind of know what those things are. It looks pretty good. But if you zoom into 100 parts per million, now you've got a whole list of chemicals and preservatives and who knows what to make that thing last on the shelf for eons. And that's a different picture and a different perspective on that same exact product. So we're looking and asking product manufacturers to start to look at this level. And I think I'll save it for a bit later. This in the States, this has been quite litigious, as we like to be, and that has actually moved the market quite a lot too. If the quick story was quite a while ago, but like a company like Nike had a shirt that had printing on it, sports shirt, and it was shown to have some hazardous carcinogenic material in the ink. But who do you think was sued? The Nike with the deep pockets or the ink manufacturer? So Nike took the hit, but then Nike had to now look at, well, what are we putting on it? And really started to climb into it. And they hired that cradle to cradle company, which I had worked for quite a while ago too. And then they got to see, well, if they go up the pipeline, up the chain, they saw what kind of ingredients were coming into their products, and they ultimately have to be responsible for that. So then they started greening, up their supply stream. So not that that's that common, but they're the ones with the deep pockets. They're the ones who are going to get the hit. But it's as a manufacturer, having that responsibility of knowing what's in your product, what you're putting out in the world. So how do we do that? So back to that type 3 label, these environmental product declarations, EPDs, is just like these nutritional labels. You're not going to necessarily see it in this label format, which is be nice and handy. It gets very technical, to be honest. I know products need to have them, but I don't actually read them. They just need to have them. But they're also third party. They're very structured, and they'll measure things that are in this blue box here: the acidification potential and global warming potential. And as a specifier, those don't really do much for you. As well, this does not mean it's green just because it has an EPD. This is, again, just reporting. I had to do it. Here's my report. Here's my data. That's it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's green. Here's an example of one for flooring. This is just the front sheet. So it kind of shows you, it has to be by a certain lab. It's got a sort of format. Then there's a whole bunch of data that follows this. But I think what's more useful is the next level up, which is called Health Product Declaration. And our next speaker will talk to a little bit about this as well for her product. And this is looking at what does this product do to humans and the environment, and that we probably care about. The ones below the line are more climate related. The ones above are the ones with people who have to sit there and breathe it, and the animals and humans and mammals that are around it that have to interact with that chemical. So the HPD gives a chemical inventory of a building product and then characterizes the level of concern about these ingredients. So again, you don't have to go find the stuff. That what this HPD is an open source repository of all this data. And to be honest, companies are really a little bit hesitant at first to go down these paths because they feel like they're giving away a lot of proprietary information, and they don't want to just give that away to their competitors. But I think more and more, and again, this has been out there for 10, 15 years too, they're realizing that people need to know, and you're not really losing your competitive edge by giving those, but you are showing market leadership by being transparent and by basically showing your cards and that you care about your product and the people who, your customers and consumers. So they have a website that you can go to for that. And then the last bit is really this label called Declare, which is an entry level as well. It's similar to an EPD in that it doesn't necessarily mean it's green, but it's the first step in really thoroughly reporting what your product has and where it comes from, and these metrics. And then how do we transform and improve from there? And it's changing our mindset a little bit of thinking of, like, instead of just being less bad of what we already have, is how do we make something that's actually doing good in the world and improving things. So also this International Living Future Institute has a label called Living Product Challenge. And they go beyond the declare of just what is the footprint, the negative, to saying what is the handprint, which is all the positives. So the extra good things, or the extra good social, upliftment, and then you can, again, get a label that celebrates that. It's not easy to get, but then that speaks volumes in the world and volume in when it comes to marketing your product. So that's kind of the Rolls Royce of product labels. Just two quick things to finish on. I think the journey is the good stuff. From a manufacturer's perspective, going on this journey is pursuing, it establishes a baseline assessment of your starting point. Where are you now in your processes and energy and water consumption? And then have you examined your ingredients? And then it provides a framework of what and where to examine and where to go. And I think our next speaker will be speaking to this because it is a bit of a undertaking, but you end up with a score. And then as improvements are made, you can always improve your score, but you at least know where you are in your journey and then where you want to go. And it takes it's a good leadership role for companies. And I just want to wrap with, we did a webinar a while back on the Living Product Challenge with presenters from the source. And that's on the GreenEd website. And it was quite interesting with the human scale. This product's here in South Africa has 26 living product labels, at least at the time of then it was. So that's really impressive. And then this is just GreenEd. We have lots of webinars there if you want to learn about more topics. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you. Very insightful. every time I'm listening to this, I think we can do like a 2-hour course on this, or half a day course on this to
I did it in 20
get
minutes.
into the detail. Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to call on Thando to show herself and share your presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Thando. I'm a sustainability coordinator at Balgatex. We are a manufacturing company that manufactures carpets and artificial grass. We are a manufacturer that strives to be a world-class African brand showcase through the deep connection we share with our people, products, and the planet. We are driven by our vision, and we focus our efforts on innovation, quality, and sustainable product manufacturer. As an African company, we have set out to lead by example, providing certified greener alternatives without compromising on product performance and design. Our purpose is founded upon creativity, communication, and collaboration, and this positions us to nurture meaningful connections. And in this way, we strive to be better every day, both as a source of inspiration and the knowledge we hold as experienced manufacturers. So this is our green journey, starting from 1991, even though the company is older than that. In 1991, we had our shake department formed. Then in 1995, we had a recycling program formed, the waste converters, where we were taking production waste and finding ways to recycle it instead of taking it to landfill. And then we had our ISO 9001 certification in 96. Then in 2004, we increased the amount of solution dyed nylon and PP that we produced. Sorry, a very eco-friendly factory with the lights turn off if you don't move. Yeah, so then we were trying to move from wet dyeing, where we would produce a white carpet and then dye it. Then we moved to solution dyeing the nylon and the PP, which is more eco-friendly, especially for effluents. And then we also started a reclamation program where we would collect warranty claims and uplift and then convert it into another product. So it'd be like a rug, or we would pick, if it's tiles, pick the tiles that we can be reused and then resell them again in the informal market. And then we also started testing our products for VOC criteria for the Green Building Council of South Africa. And then we also got our ISO 14001 certification. And then we also upgraded our effluent treatment plants, which is where we treat our water to remove the latex from it, and then before we release it into the local municipal water treatment plant. And then by 2014, 100% of our nylon and fiber was solution dyed. And then we also introduced a water harvesting dam. And then in 2017, it became South Africa's first 6-star rating building for industrial facility. And then in 2018, we had our ISO 45001, which was back then called 18001. And in 2019, 10% of our manufacturing energy requirements were from renewable energy. And since 2019, we've had a successful SMETA 4-pillar third-party audit, which looks at ethical trade. And we've also increased our internal reuse and recycling of production waste and putting it back into our products. We've also compiled our first carbon footprint that included scopes 1, 2, and 3. We also committed to the Science Based Targets Initiative and submitted our targets for verification. So our eco pillars drive us to have long-term operational plans that challenge us to ask more of ourselves and less of the planet in the things that we do. And the pictures shown below are the solar installation that we have at the factory on our roof that we get our renewable energy from, and then the rain harvesting water dam as well that we have on site. So in a world of vague claims, we chose transparency because the eco labels from that we get, they are very holistic. They cover broader criteria than just LCA. They also look at social responsibility. They look at health and ecotoxicity. So then also we're able to compare and see where we need to improve and where we excel. So we know where to focus our energy and be like, okay, this is where we need to focus our energy and this is where we need to improve for these certain products as well. And it's also transparent because the customer as well can see where we do well and where we don't do well, and then they can make an informed decision on our product. Okay, and then this is just the slide showing the different meanings for all of the scorings. Our eco labels are available on the Green Tag website as well as our own website, the Bargotex website. And we do this to continue creating trust by being transparent and showing our certifications and making them readily available. So how do eco labels benefit us in the market? So for a customer, how can the customer be certain that the product that they have in their hand is not harmful and also impacts positively on the issues that they care about? And then as a manufacturer, how do we take all that work that we've put into product development and then pack them into a simple statement that shows that customers can trust us? So this is why we then work with Green Tag. It's a globally recognized brand, and it also helps us get our message across that what we are saying is true. It also helps with regulatory trends because we then don't have unverified claims out there. It also gives us a competitive edge as well. And also when customers ask for proof, we can then show them certificates to be like, here it is. This is actually true what we are saying. So in terms of the product offerings from Green Tag, we have the product health declaration that Michelle spoke into, which looks at the toxicity of your raw materials and how they harm the planet, if they're good for the planet, and also the effects they have on human health as well. And we do this by submitting VOC tests to Green Tag as well as our MSDSs. And if Green Tag says, no, this MSDS isn't clear enough, we then ask the supplier to then be more transparent and list all the ingredients that they have in their product. And then if they say, no, they don't want to deal with us, they can deal directly with Green Tag and sign an NDA with them, and then they can keep their confidential information confidential. But then we still do get transparency because we can see it when we get the results back from the PhD, the product health declaration. And then for the green rates and LCA rates, they are more simple for consumers to read because it's the scoring, and then you have that scoring cards, and then like the score you got, is it gold, is it not gold? And then so it's easy for the customer to read that compared to an EPD. But also when all combined, the green rates and the LCA rates, and they also look at broader sustainability criteria, as I said. So it's a lot of information goes into this. So then for EPDs and LCA rates, you will have to do an LCI, which looks at the inputs and outputs of your factory and your process. So then you would look at the energy you've used, the water you've used, the packaging you've used, and then also the materials you've used to make your product. And then the outputs would look at the waste you've generated, the packaging you used to package your product before sending it out, and then the product that you did send out. And they'll use that to calculate your impact for the LCA. And then also it goes beyond that, as I said, that these certificates cover broader sustainability. They'll also look at our ISO certificates to see how our operations are in terms of health and safety, environment, and quality. They look at how we treat our employees by sending in like how we handle grievance procedures, processes, contracts that we send to our employees to see that there isn't any forced labor. We'll also send them our SMETA report to show that our value chain, as well as our employees, are treated ethically. We'll also send them proof of our internal recycling, and we'll also send them proof of our reclamation products, where I said we'll take uplift and convert it to a rag, and then it's used by our foundation, the Go Group, who then get the rag vendors to sell that product that was uplifted. So we have to submit all this proof to get all the certificates. So yeah, it is very time consuming. So the pros and cons of both eco-labels and EPDs is that the pros, they give us scientific credibilities because EPDs comply with global standards, as Michelle had mentioned, and we do have to provide very granular detail. They give us a competitive edge, and they also create brand trust. They reinforce our commitment as well to be transparent and not greenwash, because we have to send in all this information, and then we also then have to send proof, and we are also audited as well by Green Tag, and the EPDs are third-party verified as well. So you have to be transparent as a company. So then it reinforces our commitment to keep being transparent. They also have a holistic criteria, which covers a lot of sustainability aspects, as I said, such as energy, waste, water, health and safety, ethical labor practices, social responsibility, all of that. Yeah, so there's no room to be vague. You have to provide proof of everything that you've said, and then they also keep us ahead of regulatory trends, such as scoring bans on unverified claims, because our claims have to be verified in order for us to make these claims on the certificates. Yeah. The cons is that they are very costly, and you have to renew them annually. You pay for that, and then there's recertifications every few years. You also have to pay for that. So that's one of the biggest cons for us, because we have a very big product portfolio, but only a small portion of that is covered by eco-labels, because we can't afford to pay to have all our products have eco-labels. So we need to relook at that as a company and how we can get certifications to cover more of our products than we have covered now. The certification process takes a very long time. Firstly, for us as the manufacturer, collecting all this data and verifying this data before we send it. And it also takes a long time for Green Tag themselves to verify this data and go through this data. So yeah, this process takes a very long time. And as Michelle had mentioned, there is some limited consumer awareness in terms of EPDs. They're very complex. So if you are like a layperson, you just don't really understand what's in it, or you just look at one aspect of it, like the global warming potential, whereas it listed more impacts, like a lot of impacts of what actually is also environmental impacts as well. And then also there's limited transparency. Consumers can't see how much better the product is. They just know that it meets the standard. So they don't know, like, has it met the standard more than like 80% or 20%? They just know that it's met the standard. So that's one of the things. But this is mostly, I will say, for EPDs, because with the LCA rate, as you saw, it is LCA rate and green rate, it is explained out to show how better the product is. And then another con is supplier collaboration. It's very difficult. It's very hard to get transparency from your suppliers, as I'd mentioned before. Some of them will refuse to share the information, even though you have reassured them that, no, we've signed an NDA with Green Tag, so your information won't be shared, even though it's proprietary. And then some of them, we don't even talk to them. They talk directly to GreenTag. They'll be like, we don't want you involved. We don't want you to know what is in our products because we don't want you to like start making the product yourself. So then they will then start only speaking to GreenTag, and it makes the process longer because sometimes you'll even ask one small question. Like remember we asked the supplier if they could tick if their products complied with REACH, and the previous year they said yes, and the product hadn't changed, but this time they were like, no, we want to go test before we tick this box that says yes. So, and then it took weeks because then we had to wait for them to go get testing and all of that done. But I guess that's because of the different regulations in the different countries, because I think for them they have to test before they tick yes, but for us we know, so we can tick it. Hope I'm making sense. The other con is that they are very complex and they require lots of granular data. So there's a lot of data that goes into it that sometimes it can even confuse you as the person who's putting the data together as to how exactly is this picture. But then I think once you start doing it more than once, like once you've done your first certification, you're doing a second one, you now know what this means, all this granular data, what it means and what it feeds into, and how you can then take the certificate and try to improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Thando. That was very interesting to hear it from a manufacturer perspective and how you guys have dealt with EPDs and green tags. Let's get the conversation started. Any questions? Michelle, go for it while I'm trying to unmute everyone.
I was just going to expand a little bit because it made me think of it as Thando was speaking. So obviously it sounds very complex and it's difficult. It's not an easy path for the manufacturers. But I think two things I'd like to point out. These are really integral for the green building certification tools like Green Star and LEED. And with Green Star coming out with a new version shortly, it's going to be more and more important that this kind of labeling will be a minimum. So you want your product to count towards a certain credit, it's going to have that labeling. It's not like you can go and put forth data and it will comply. And that's becoming more and more the norm globally. So that's we're following that trend and that trajectory as well. And then the other aspect is it's just as a specifier, how do you change the marketplace? How can you contribute to moving the needle forward? And it's asking for these products. So over the years, manufacturers have said to me, oh, well, we would go down this path, but we don't really feel our customers are asking for it, or we don't really feel the market forces. And it's a kind of a catch-22 because the consumers need to know enough about it and awareness to be able to ask for it and know what it means and how to use it. And then the manufacturer's like, oh, our customers are asking for it. Let's go down that path. And we want to be a leader, a company that's showing leadership like Belgo, Texas, and that we just heard. So, but like maybe Tanya, you could say it. Once you go through that process, though, the next time it's a little bit easier, hopefully, and you have a lot of the data and baseline. So now you know how to quantify your water, how to quantify the energy, and then the next time around it gets easier and easier, and then you can improve from there.
I see that Adele has a question. As a manufacturer, do you see a lot of clients asking for these? Yes, as the years have gone by, I think I started the certification journey in 2022. And from then up until now, there's been a steady increase of people asking for these certifications, especially EPDs. And then the client will be like, okay, yes, I can see that this is the product category, but I want proof that the product that I'm asking for falls under this product category. So they've also been very aware of there's been greenwashing. So they want to be very certain that what they ask for is the truth.
And there's a hand up from Fusion BIM. I'm sure that's not your name, but you can ask your question.
Hello, thank you. My name is Francois. My email account just displays on Google Maps, on the online Google as Fusion BIM. And as the name says, we do BIM implementation. do projects through them. And my question is related to the energy performance data for analysis. And because in our BIM world, we do analysis of these models, and we can configure the building materials in those models to have the real world performance data so that we can run these analysis. So my question is, these EPDs that Thandu mentioned for our South African context, you've gone through the process with your product. Are there any R values, any such performance values that is part of the process that you've gone through that will give us as specifiers that information for analysis?
No, we haven't done it ourselves, but we send through the data. So we'll send through all the types of energy that we do use. Yeah, and then they'll be the ones who will analyze it. But we do have someone in-house who also does RCAs. And what we did realize was that because we use coal, it can be a little bit higher, but not that high when you consider it's very complex. Like you have to look at the country you're in, the energy matrix you're using, and all of that. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, and the LCA analysis is exactly behind the question, because as Michelle also mentioned, that to do LCAs is complex because you need the real world data. You can't use a European performance specifications for a product in South Africa because of the performance is different up there and down here for the same product. So we need the data. How and when do we get to that database?
It's hard because we had to get a consultant. We used a greenhouse, and they were able to create for us the energy matrix for SASOL, for Eskom. Sorry, I don't know what to say. For Eskom to show like the energy, how much it would be. So I don't know. Maybe Michelle would be the best person for this one.
I'm going to kick it off to Marloes, who's done more of the LCAs.
Yeah, I think also what, Francois, what you're referring to is also calculating the embodied carbon of a building, which is becoming more and more important.
Yeah.
Also with the new version of Green Star, as Michelle alluded to, through a BIM model. Like, so you put your materials in, and then the model sort of calculates what the upfront embodied carbon is. So the energy that is used to make all these materials, which is often forgotten, instead of like just looking at the energy that the building will use over its life cycle. So I think the EPDs will be your input for that. So the EPDs will tell you what the embodied carbon of that particular material is to calculate that for your building. Michelle, you want to add anything to that?
It's an area that needs a lot of data and a lot of work. And I think even Australia a couple of years back were saying they were building a big database, and they would still had another 5 to 8 years to go to get it somewhere usable. So it is definitely a holy grail to be able to, plug it in and then get these, numbers back. I usually don't go to LCA so much because I speak to architects and designers often, and they're like, well, how do I decide then if I'm looking at 2 products? It would be great if I had this calculation. So there's other criteria about how to evaluate green materials that I generally put forward, but just having a company that's taking these leadership and going down this path is a definite good first step.
Thanks for your question. That was a very interesting one.
Thank you.
There's a question from Lillian, and I'm going to rephrase it slightly, and I'm going to ask Michelle to answer it. So the question is Green Tag, is it your aim to get all manufacturers to adhere to your requirements in the whole of South Africa? I think they would love to. And so I was also thinking of something else. The government of South Africa at some point was trying to legislate eco-labels for each and every product in the construction industry. However, that product sort of stops. And Michelle, maybe you're probably more aware of what happened or what happened there. But the idea was that each manufacturer had to get an eco label so that you could, distinguish between a good product and a non-green product. And I think that other argument that I wanted to make, it's also always, yes, it's expensive, and it's also actually a bit crazy that only those products that are green are trying to do and go through this process, adding more cost onto their good product already, whereas there's like so many bad products out of there, and they can just do whatever they want to do without having to justify their bad practices. It's like, why should we be paying more for an organic tomato, whereas like the mass manufactured tomato can get away with chemicals and stuff for very cheap. So actually it should be the other way around. Bad products should be forced to get I guess I can't call it an eco label then, but get a label which actually demonstrates how bad the product is. And if you then have a very good product, it should just fly through that process.
Like
Anyway,
a surcharge.
Where my opinion.
Surcharge for being bad, and you can
Yes,
waive it if you're proven good. I was just going to address the green tag question. Just a bit of a nuance. So of all those different label types, a lot of those, especially the single issue ones, are pass-fail type criteria. So it gives a threshold. If you do X, then you comply, and then you get the stamp of approval. So both green tag and eco standard are different in that they're more ratings scales. So there's not a yes, no answer to them. And maybe Thando can speak to that too. So you can get, when you put all your points together, let's say you're at a 65%, and you're looking at carpet, and then you can compare that to, say, a wood flooring maybe, which is a completely different product category, and maybe that one comes in at like 70%. So then you can kind of compare a little bit across product types. Whereas, and to speak to the government program, as far as I know, has a stand for correction, I think it's still ticking along forward, but that was looking to be more product specific. So here's one for paint. Here's this category for, I think wool and textiles was one, and and there was like 9 categories, I believe, that they were addressing first. So within that category, it would set out what the yes, no criteria was. So that's a little bit different than these 2 other labels, Eco Standard and Green Tag, that look to, encompass quite a lot of different, packaging and transport, and a little bit more holistic. And as a result, I do feel they're definitely more robust. And then you can kind of see a metric that would be comparable across product types.
Great, thank you. One last question, anyone?
I saw Amy has one here. Could you please explain it, Amy? What is the biggest challenge when targeting a green tag?
Hi, I think just in general, from like a manufacturer's point of view, when targeting green tag or any of these labels, just from a personal experience, what was, I don't know, your biggest hill to overcome, or your biggest challenge in order to obtain the green tag?
It's kind of having to look at how would it affect us in the market. Oh, sorry, I hate these lights. They always switch off. Yeah. So it's more in terms of, does the market want it or need it? And then, okay, once you've looked at that, you don't want to also keep repeating the same label again. Like with the green tag certificates, we were looking at doing a declare label, and then we were like, no, but the declare label is similar to the product health declaration, so we would be paying more money to do the same thing again. So that's the biggest challenge, is to have our salespeople look at how it's going to affect the market. Is it going to make us money? I know that's not like the main purpose of an eco label, but we need to justify paying that money and putting in all that work and saying, yes, we will make money because people want to buy products that have eco labels. So that's one of the bigger challenges when trying to make a decision in terms of which eco label to go for, which products to get eco labels for, and all of that. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Michelle, there's a long question from Wulan in the chat.
And just I just read it. Yeah, I just is asking about other industries like this hospitality or the services sector. So these labels we've been talking about is pretty much specific to the built environment and construction of material products, and intentionally narrow for those reasons. In the very beginning, I was showing there's like all sorts of other labels for like organic food and sustainable fishing and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of other labels that do similar things, but they each have their own criteria and their own, you know, probably very similar way of substantiating compliance. But what we were talking about today is just specific to the built environment and products and materials.
All right, and then the last question, we did address this a little bit in the presentation, so Michelle, you can maybe give like a very quick and rounded answer. Many green products are now being tested with ISO classifications. It's not actually a question, but I think that's what Michelle was presenting on, is like different levels of ISO classifications. And yeah, maybe you can look at the recording. As you mentioned, you joined.
Just quickly, ISO has a lot of standards across a lot of different things. So I think you have two things here. So one was like how you define what is a label, eco label, and they've defined that as type 1, 2, and 3 that we covered. And then the other thing is if you're in a certain test laboratory or test facility, you often have to also meet certain ISO compliance. So I'm a laboratory that can, you know, meets ISO something else, and you know, so that's maybe where you're seeing they're being tested. The laboratories and the testing methodologies all have ISO, you know, sort of standards as well. So there's, yeah, lots of different ISO ones, but ISO itself is not testing products. They set the standards for what, like quality assurance of testing and methodologies, etc.
Great. Okay. In terms of time, I think I'm gonna wrap up the webinar. Thank you guys for those questions. That was great. We're going to skip April with all the public holidays around. We thought like nobody's going to pitch for our webinar, so let's all take a break in April. I'll be looking out for lions in Botswana, so I'm definitely taking a break. So we're going to be back in May. And the topic for May is greening your life. So we want to come up with some speakers that are really applying the principles to their own life and how you can possibly green your own life. So I think that would be interesting. Okay, and with that, I want to say thank you, a big thank you to our speakers. We had a bit of a speaker nightmare for this webinar, but eventually it all worked out very nicely. Thank you to Thando and Michelle for jumping in and committing to this webinar. I think the presentations were super insightful, and as I say, like we can talk about this for hours and create a whole course around this. Thando, thank you for sharing your experience as a manufacturer, and Michelle for sharing your technical knowledge about all these eco labels. And making it sound like it's easy. I know it's not. Also, thank you to our sponsor for this webinar, the SIAD, South African Institute of Drafting, who waived our validation fees for the CPD points. It's really, really appreciated. And then lastly, I just want to mention for those of you who are in Cape Town, we're coming to Cape Town with the DFGE course, which is really a Green Building 101 course. It's a 3-day in-person course. So if you're in Cape Town and interested, reach out to us. It's really interesting. And again, help us to create a larger following on any of our socials. It really helps us to find sponsorship for these webinars so that we can keep going with these. And with that, I think thank you for attending. Thank you for participating. Have a great evening, and I hope to see you back in May. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.